So you'll probably get a note that says things are being recorded. Um, Welcome to this listening session tonight. I'm really glad that we have this group here. I'm going to open us with a word of prayer, and then we'll be able to get started. So let's pray together. Holy and gracious God, thank you so much for all that you've given to us. Thank you for choosing us as stewards of so many resources. I pray that you would be with this group tonight. Help us to listen to one another, to hear more closely your voice, and to follow your spirit. It's in your Son, Jesus' holy and powerful name that I pray. Amen. All right. In a second, I'm going to turn things over to David Forney, chair of the Special Finance Group, to kind of present a little bit. And then we've got about 15 people on this call, so it is helpful if you use the raise hand feature on Zoom, and we'll try to take people, in order. I think it's also helpful if you have a series of points you'd like to make, if you would maybe make one, let's see who else wants to get in, and try to kind of share the airtime. So having said all that, I'll turn it over to David.
Mm. Well, thank you, Josh. Uh, the last listening meeting was a really good, at least from my perspective, conversation. Uh, we've also been receiving some really thoughtful and in-depth um, people writing and emailing. So I would want to encourage you that after tonight's conversation, if there's something more that you either want to have the special finance group here, or if there's something that comes out tonight that you want to be captured in terms of some particular verbiage, would absolutely welcome that. Um, I'm going to have the assumption that because you're on this Zoom call, you have had at least some reading, if not a thorough reading of the proposed policy. So I'm not going to take too much time on going over that. I do want to say I just have such a huge appreciation for the special finance group. Each of them has just been a real great to get to know. I did not know any of them before working since December, but we're kind of fond of each other now. I don't know what we're going to do once our work is done, but we've really enjoyed engaging in this. Um, and would also want to say that the special finance group is in full support of it. There was no kind of if, ands, and buts with the final piece. There was a great conversations all through it and a lot of perspectives offered, but the full committee really offers this as their best kind of work to the presbytery. Um, uh, there has been a number of, both from the listening group and, as I said, by people also emailing, and that the finance group has been working kind of nonstop, particularly this week. There's been quite a bit of good activity with it, and we are making adjustments to the policy with the places that really make a lot of sense to the special finance group. There's been some modest adjustments, but there's also been several that have been much better. And so when we get to the floor of the presbytery, the special finance group will do an amended policy that they're going to bring to the floor of Presbyterian. We'll certainly have that document up before the Presbytery before the June 10th meeting. I'm not quite sure when we're going to say, oh, we're not going to make any more changes from here to the Presbytery meeting. Of course, things can take place on the floor of the Presbytery, but we really want to perfect the policy as best we can. So your time tonight is a real treasure, and we appreciate it very much. So I'm just going to pause and let folks jump in with your questions or comments or concerns.
I saw a physical hand raised, Barclay, Virginia, but if you would just introduce yourself with your name and where you're from, and what church and all that.
Thank you, Josh. I could not find my raise hand
Gosh,
icon,
okay.
so I use my actual right hand. Barclay Bradshaw,
Barclay.
a ruling elder at Three Chop Pres in Richmond. I've been there about 35 years working in their financial area, as well as many other areas. And my day job, I'm a retired CPA. So I've got a little bit of background in my
More than a
career.
little.
In my career, that relates to this work product. And I really need, before I share my comments, I have some commendations for the POJ to establish this task force, much needed with the millions of dollars of net assets lost over the last half dozen or so years. I commend the 5 members who volunteered their time and served on this effort. I know how valuable time is, particularly my fellow congregant, Bill Brownfield, who I've been blessed to know throughout my tenure at Three Chop. And I especially commend the group for recommending that budget should be balanced and the budget should help to sustain the organization in a total, but particularly as relates to its finances. Now for my input on your work product. I guess the main thing I have is a response to what I believe I heard as I reviewed the initial listening session and the exchange between David and Mr. Flournoy, another accountant, as he identified himself. David, I thought I heard you say that the current about $6 million of designated funds held by the POJ, you would anticipate that upon adopting this policy, your proposed policy, those designations would disappear and they would all support drawing 4 to 5% per year to support the mission programs of the presbytery on an annual basis. Did I understand your response, your comment to Mr. Flournoy correctly?
I'm not sure. Some of the things that you said are, I just would add a bit of more information. The first is that as of March, after the Q1 2025, the committee is using a $4.5 million fund assets from RBC. So it's not 6. But the policy is proposing that unless it's explicitly written in the policy for a designated fund, that the Presbyterian's former designations would be grandfathered out. They'd sunset. The donor restricted assets, of course, don't sunset out. But the policy does recognize that there are some POJ designated funds, particularly those that were designated for the sale of churches in 2023. The committee did not make any change to what the Presbytery approved in 2023. And those are designated funds. For instance, 50% goes to the kind of general investments, but there's also the resurrection, the reparations, the tithe. Those designated funds would remain designated funds as outlined, as the Presbytery currently has and is outlined in the policy.
I guess maybe there's just a disconnect that maybe Mr. Flournoy had with what he looked at and what I had. The 6 million I'm referring to is the total of all of the designated funds, regardless of where the money is parked that is tied to those funds, be it in the checking account or in investments. But for any draw off of the investments, to support the budget, they've got to come from a particular fund. They don't just come from the investment holdings. For the accounting to work, a particular fund needs to be reduced for anything that's drawn out of the investments. And that type of activity is shown and is tracked well by the accountants for the POJ. I'm looking at page 22 and 23, but particularly 22 of the packet that just came out for the upcoming June meeting, where it tracks all of the activity of these various funds. If the proposal or the intent of the finance team is for about 20 funds for their original purpose to go away and just totally be lumped together to support the mission portion of the POJ budget, I feel as though that should be a motion coming from your team for the POJ's consideration. The POJ made decisions in the past to set up these 20 some odd funds. Seemed like a motion would be needed to pull them all together, if that's what your intent is. What I feel should happen is that the team just proactively say the fund that's been used primarily to cover the deficits over the last few years, the Church and Ministries Development Fund would be the primary fund that the 4 to 5% would come from each year. And you wouldn't have to get approval for that. It wouldn't involve eliminating the prior designations of all of these various funds that the POJ has made over the years.
Is there
I do
a
see.
question, or is that appreciate the comment?
So I do see Tom Coy, your hand raised. I see Carrie's physical hand, and I'm wondering if Carrie might be trying to speak to this current topic that we're on. If that's the case, Carrie, would you unmute yourself? And then if that's the case, Tom, I will definitely get to you, but I want to stay on this track if that's all right. Okay, cool.
Just a question for Barclay. You looked at the package for the meeting, and you're looking at the chart on page 22 that says POJ net assets without restrictions. Is that the 6 million figure that you're using?
Correct. You see a little bit lower from the title, board designated funds, that's shaded. These are the funds that show up as unrestricted in the external financials issued by the POJ, that the restrictions are subject to the POJ's approval. My point is, if it's the intent that we can take assets from these restrictions, these funds, to support the regular budget, that should be a proactive motion to the POJ to do so.
Well, just if I understand, when Cindy talked to us beforehand, when you go down to where it says like the Greenwood Presbyterian Church, Gordonsville, Advance, a lot of those accounts there are holding spaces for the property that we are currently holding. And if you looked all the way over on the bottom 3 of them, it says acquired property, but the bottom 3 are not really cash items. If you go all the way over,
yeah, the 6 million in funds doesn't mean it's 6 million in investments. Some could be in property, some could be in your checking account. A lot are in your investments. I'm sure the lion's share of what's in the investment holdings by the investment manager is in this Church and Ministries Development Fund of 3.6 million at the end of the quarter, 3.3 million.
But basically, yeah, the ones that the company that manages their funds are mainly from the top part of that chart.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure, because with all these numbers floating around and all, I'm trying to make sure we all stay on the same page when we're talking numbers is all. That's
Right,
just thinking that we're on the same page. So thank you.
yeah. So I guess my suggestion for the finance group is to look at page 22 from the June board package. And if you can identify which funds you feel as though should be charged for any support to the budget, just go ahead and put that in your report in section 5C3 or somewhere in section 5C. That's my suggestion for you. I don't want to keep on dominating this time we have together tonight
Yeah,
on this
no,
matter.
but as a CPA, we twice as much appreciate your perspective on it because, as I said, the last listening session, I'm not an accountant, and so can use the expertise without question. It probably would make some sense to. In a special group, we'll have a conversation about whether we do have a separate motion to, if the policy is approved, to identify those. We probably would not identify them within the policy itself, because if they go away, then there's this legacy within a policy that may get confusing down the road. But I reread the motion from the committee, and it is not explicit that about those fund designations that they do go away with the new policy. But that is the intent, that the designations follow the new policy. And if there's any other designations that the POJ has set on itself, board designated, that those would sunset.
I guess whatever the intention of the team is, I think it should be clear. And
Yeah,
these,
agreed.
these designations going away, I don't see that when I look at the entire product.
Thank
I
you.
would not have thought that until I listened to the recording of the first listening session.
So a little, maybe just one more to put a little bit finer point on it for us is we heard both in our interviews and also in the survey that the way in which the funds get talked about and used has been confusing for some members of the POJ. And so in the desire to have better transparency and access, we really are trying to have a more, I don't want to say simplified, but just a clarity about these things, which I do think is part of what you're suggesting. So I appreciate that.
And to your point, the clarity for the staff or whoever is preparing these reports is very important.
Yeah.
So anything that can help the staff, the people who are responsible for the internal and external financials for the POJ, that would be a benefit if it can come from y'all's effort. So,
Right.
I do
Thank you
have
so
a
much,
few more.
Barclay. I would
Go ahead,
like
go
to, Tom has been very patient. So
Go
Barclay,
ahead,
if you
go
wouldn't
ahead.
mind,
I'll yield.
we might circle back to you. But Tom, go ahead.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Josh. For starters, I just think this is a wonderful compilation of so many facets of the finances of the presbytery, and it's nice to have it all like in one place. I remember years ago when Camp Hanover was doing its 50th anniversary capital campaign drive that I worked with Carson quite a bit just to put together a gifts policy. You know, how's the policy going to, will people give gifts of stock or property or something like that to help? And we had nothing on record at that time, and we put some together, and I see that a lot of that's been incorporated now into the larger document. So I'm really glad for that. Secondly, a small question, and I'll get around to my main question in just a second. I have a small tweak,
Sure.
but is that something I could just communicate by email?
Yes, that would
So-
be easiest for me because then I'd know exactly what the tweak is.
Okay, very good. Okay.
We appreciate tweaks. We want to have it, as I said, perfected.
Okay, well, this is sort of a more of a meta question I have now. Looking at section 5C4, which gets into the use of the investments um, for purposes of supporting the ministry and the administrative obligations of the presbytery.
Mm-hmm.
So C3 is annual ministry programs draw policy,
Mm-hmm.
and C4 is the annual administrative draw policy. And this is, of course, a sensitive area that was somewhat at the core of a lot of our discussions over the last year with the review of the strategic plan. Um, if I understand correctly, that the policy that we have been doing of taking a certain percentage of, I think now we're talking about a 12-quarter rolling average, uh, that when we prepare a budget for a particular year, the policy is saying that we can take up to what, 5%? Is that what it is? Yeah, no, yeah,
Yep.
between 4 and 5%.
Mm-hmm.
To move that into the operations of the budget for that coming year. And item 4 says of all of that, 1% could be used for administrative or operational support with a documented reason for so doing. Now, we were taking a whole lot of money previously to pay for salaries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing that there is a real tightening down on the use of the fund here, this draw for salaries. Am I reading that correctly? Am I hearing correctly? We're
Um,
narrowing that impact
that
by quite
is
a bit.
there's a that could be the effect of it, but that is not the desire to have the 4 to 5% issue is trying to do what I refer to as an arbitration. We're trying to arbitrate between current day needs and future needs. And I think if you draw less than 4%, you're uh, you're 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 giving more to the future needs than the current day needs. And if you're over 5%, my perspective is you're giving more to current day needs than to future needs. And so there's an arbitration there. I don't know exactly, there's no precision about that. If it were me, I'd probably peg it at 4.5 and leave it. But the Presbytery needs to be able to have some leverage about that. So the committee picked the 4 to 5% first before we came to the 1%. We
Okay.
also recognize, and that value is in part because a lot of these funds, particularly when you think of a sale of a church and 50% of it goes into this pool of this investment, that our desire is that be able to sustain these ministerial programs, and we want to be able to do that in perpetuity. And that and the other major, it's larger than the investment income, currently it is, that is congregational giving, that is principally how the administrative side gets funded, and it's roughly 2 to 1 right now, roughly. But we also recognize that some monies in that investment also could be things that aren't from congregation. So, for instance, if the Presbytery were to sell its facilities, that money, the proceeds from that, unless we go buy a new place, could be a part of that corpus, and that would make sense that the Presbytery would want to use some of that money for the administrative side. But we were not trying to make a case that we want to reduce Presbytery staff, and this is our mechanism for doing that.
I wasn't quite asking about staff reduction.
Well,
Uh,
hold on a second. I'm
okay.
gonna share my screen because this very number 4 has actually been edited by the committee, given some of the input. So hopefully you're going to be able to see on your screen uh, what you were talking about.
Okay.
So number 3 obviously was the annual ministry draw at the top of the screen. I'm going to pan up for you all. Number 4, you'll see that where we've struck out the language that you've been reading,
Okay.
because there was some question about, are you taking 1% of the 5% draw? So if you draw 50,000, you only have $500 for it. And we're like, okay, this is confusing. The person was right to lift this issue up. So we wanted to make it clearer. And the second part was, who does the annual review? It did not list, it just said it shall be done. And so this was another helpful input. So we listed out that is a trustee's piece. So I wanted you to have this so you could see it, though, Tom, that might not be any of your follow-up question about it, but we are been having good conversations about this particular section.
Well, now that I read what you have there, it seems to be that uh, uh, there's still an ambiguity. That 1% still looks like it's 1% of the 5% that was withdrawn. Uh, there could be a little clarifying of the language on that.
For the total annual ministerial draw, which is the 4 to 5%, up
Right.
to 1% of that amount may be allocated. Yeah, it's still ambiguity, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah.
I gotta work
The
on it
language
more.
trap is still there.
Yeah,
We
it is.
tried to say it just needs to be, yeah.
Yeah, I'm turning off my shared screen because the trap's still there until I get it right. So that,
But yeah, we're getting closer to the truth here, and I mean, I like what's being said here. I mean, I'm not fighting this because I think
I don't hear
I
that.
think it's a very good policy we're putting in place. It's very fair. It's a very responsible use of the assets we have, and it's good stewardship. But what I am also hearing is that because that's that's it. This is what we're going to draw from our investments, from our, you know, portfolio. We're going to draw that amount. That's it, folks. And the churches are the other ones that have to make up whatever makes our operating budget operate. And we have to live within those confines. And it's in those confines we have to make our decisions about salaries and other such things. Am,
Yes,
am I hearing that correctly?
yes.
Okay, yeah, I think this is good. I think this is
Because
good.
the Presbytery has said it wants to have a balanced budget and it wants to have sustainability. And so that was the drumbeat of this committee, was to make that as and the committee did not take and talk about what those reductions would be. The committee
Right,
both did
right.
not have the bandwidth nor felt that they could do that, that's the work of the full presbytery. And that
Yeah.
work has to take place every single year. What we wanted to give was the process that could help the presbytery in its decision making in a transparent, equitable way.
Mhm. Okay,
It's hard.
thank you.
This isn't going to fix the presbytery's
No.
struggles about these things. But we hope that it's the first and most important first step.
I think operating within some clear boundaries, so that really helps to narrow the discussion and to help us deal with the facts in front of us. And it clarifies our priorities, and hopefully in the end, we may reverse this downward trend of church giving that once we understand that it really is upon us as a presbytery to come up with the funding needed, maybe there'll be a resurgence, a greater respect for Presbyterian's work, and churches will feel greater ownership. I mean,
I like
that's
the word respect, and
yeah.
along with that word is that we heard that there has been some erosion of trust,
Mhm.
and when we think a policy it doesn't do all of the work by any means, but we do think a clear policy helps to reestablish trust. Trustworthiness maybe is a better way to say it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for catching my trap. We will work some more on it.
Other folks who may have topics they want to raise. I'm going to give some space here. I know Barclay, you said you had some other items, but I see Franklin's hand raised. If you'll unmute yourself and share with us.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Can you hear me?
We got you loud and clear.
All right. All right. All right. I didn't have to hold my hand up for very long. Okay, my concern is in the motion, one of the motions, motions for consideration. Number 2, especially. And I would suggest that the sentence end sooner than it does on the paper. I would put a period after the 2024 close parenthesis and strike the words "and any other standing policies or procedures that conflict with this document." The reason is that I think that that causes a problem is that what standing policies or procedures might conflict with this? Let's say the Presbytery's Manual of Administrative Operations. Well, the Presbytery approved that, I believe, by a 2/3 majority. And I don't know what kind of majority this document is going to be requiring, but I'm guessing it's a majority, just a straight majority. And I don't think you can set aside a procedure that's in a document approved by 2/3 majority. And especially to say, before we kind of know what the implications of this document are for our processes. That is prompted for me by looking at the proposed budget sample in one of the appendices. I believe it's Appendix D. I could be wrong. But there's a sample budget there. And I hope that this isn't put it there with a great seriousness, meaning that this is not there for as a rigid requirement that it has to be organized this way. And just kind of a sample, one possible way of doing it. The problem I have with the sample budget is that it's kind of confusing for the way it's giving line items to certain entities that seem to be strangely arranged. For instance, Collegiate Ministries has a line of its own in this sample, when historically Collegiate Ministries has been lodged under the Leadership Connections team and has a line item inside of the LCT budget. Now LCT's put on a lower level, a lower line, as though there's this separation between campus ministry and LCT. So the confusion about how these things are laid out there makes me suspicious that our current structure with the teams and the ministries under the teams is being kind of quietly set aside in favor of some other arrangement. But the Presbytery hasn't discussed whether or not to set aside the current structure of teams and ministries. So if we say that this current, the new financial management policy, if that's going to be superseding all previous processes, procedures that conflict with it. I'm not happy about the possibility that we're changing more than we realize by approving this.
Oh, that's helpful, Franklin. The committee did have a lot of conversations about that second part of the motion, and felt pretty strongly that we wanted to have the presbytery be clear that we're not operating with two financial policies at the same time. Which one is true? The the manual for administration, or this policy? And so there was an effort in the second part of that motion to say that with regard to the finance policies where there is a conflict, that this one for the presbytery is the one that is operational. With regard to the appendix, we are not trying to make any, though I appreciate we might be doing something that we don't wish we weren't doing, but we were not trying to make any attempt to talk about issues of governance, issues of personnel. While finance touches about everything, we were really, as best we could, trying to keep it in the finance. So the sample budget was not trying to make any claims of changing in terms of the structure of the presbytery. What it was trying to do was to talk about, we need to talk about revenues, we need to talk about administrative expenses, and we need to talk about missional or program expenses because of the revenue streams, which we've already been talking about this evening. I also now, over the last couple of days, though no one has made a recommendation about this, I've been toying with this idea that some of those line items gets funded by a designated account that is not part of the annual operational one. And so I'm toying with, gosh, do we make a new column? So the example would be for this current fiscal year, dismantling structural racism, the anti-racism piece has zero funding from the operational side, yet it is being funded by this designated fund. And it would be great to be able to capture that in the budget so that presbytery can see, oh, because we could put money in on the operational side for something that still has designated or not, but at least you would know where is the sources of the funding. This transparency issue. What are the sources of the funding, and what is the bottom line to be able to have a balanced budget? So that's all we were trying to capture. We were not trying to pull apart, like for instance, campus ministry. And so that needs to be done better, Franklin. Honestly,
Yes.
because we're
Okay,
not
well,
wanting to signal what I think you could logically say.
Yeah, thank you for your reply to that. One other little tweak that you might think about, especially with that campus ministry line on the sample budget. I believe that the presbytery supports not only the ministries that are listed there, but there's also been support for Virginia State University campus ministry. And that's not on the list.
This was it's a little bit of our struggle with the sample budget. How do you make a sample budget that goes without saying, with not saying anything? So we tried to be kind of specific, but obviously we missed the mark to some degree.
Okay, well that's okay. So what I'm hearing you say is that I don't need to be anxious that the Appendix D is going to be the ironclad template that the budget has to follow precisely in this arrangement. But before I sign off on this particular conversation. Could I suggest that I think for people like me who haven't been involved in the budgeting process very much in the presbytery, and am kind of on a low level of understanding all of these issues, it would help if, let's say, the special group could present to the presbytery something like this. Say, if the presbytery's 2025 budget was set up according to the recommendations that we are proposing for the future, this is what we'd be looking at. We would have this amount of income from the churches, we'd have this amount of income from our other resources, and this is how it could potentially be allocated if our proportions and whatnot for sending it this way or that were followed. This is how it would look. And then people could say, oh my goodness, look, we're trying to dress a 6-foot person in 5-foot clothes. How are we going to do that?
So let me I'm a little hesitant to share a screen, but now that I've said it, I probably can't not do it. But the committee did put together what would this policy do with the 2025 budget as best as we understood it. We had a difficult time understanding the finances. And so we did try that exercise after the fact, and we actually were pleased with what the outcome looked like. We have not made that chart public only because we're not we're trying to do policy. We're not trying to try and do what the presbytery should do budgetarily this coming fall. And so we were a little bit stuck in between.
Well, maybe rather than do something that
Franklin, do you mind if I appreciate your input here? It looks like Joel may be trying to speak to this point. Do you mind if Joel jumps in on this?
Please
and Carrie,
do.
I see your hand
Joel.
as well.
Yeah, I think what I saw, Franklin, in that example budget worksheet was really the special finance group trying to say, here's what we identify as administrative support, which is where you're going to pay that out of what churches are giving, and here's what we identify as missional programs, which you're going to pay out of what you're drawing from the investments, at least the way I understand this document, to divide those up so that we as the mission council could go, oh, okay, now we understand we're using this for this and this for this, because we might have said, oh, is COM an administrative thing, or is it missional? Because their argument can be made both ways, and they have helped clarify that by putting some of these things in there without saying these are the only ones that you can support with this.
And we understand that those names are going to change, and the programs are going to change. I mean, obviously COM is not going to change, but there are other ones that we understand would. So sample is kind of an operative word there.
Yeah. So that's what I had to say. Thanks, Josh.
Sure. Franklin, do you feel like you're at a good place here, or did you want to say more? I see, Carrie, I know you've got your hand raised, and I want to make sure we get as many folks in as we can.
Yes, I don't have anything more to add currently, no.
Okay, thank you so much. Carrie, why don't you unmute and share?
This is more for Franklin's benefit. Virginia State is not a current campus ministry. For a year or so, they did not cash the check. So when we checked with them, they're no longer one of our outreach things. I just want you all to know that it's been discontinued, but it was discontinued by the people at Virginia State and not by the Presbytery.
Oh,
Thanks,
right.
Kerry.
Okay, now it's coming back. Yes, I remember that. That for some reason that we didn't get any response from them,
Yeah.
and we didn't know who to talk to about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, thank you, Kerry.
So Carson, I see you next.
Thanks, Josh. And David, thank y'all for a really great work that you've done. It's amazing how quickly you've done all that you've done. I'm very grateful. I've got three real quick kind of questions. While this may not be helpful to some, I think most people in the Presbytery are not as financially literate as some are, and so they get confused. I think it'd be helpful if there was some kind of projected income possibility based on the last 3 years average of congregations, plus whatever draw from the investment. So we have a ballpark figure of what a budget might look like, not about how it'd be divided up, but for the last several years, when $1.2 and $1.3 million budgets, I just think people think we can do anything we want to. I think that'd be helpful. That's one item. Secondly, it's been confusing for years, and I appreciate you saying, David, that you're talking the 45% off of the $4.5 million figure. Is that correct? Because sometimes people are throwing around $6 million, but when you look at that, some of that's not real money. And so if we're talking about 5%, we're talking about $225,000 on 4.5 million. And then thirdly, I don't remember because it's been too many years, but I think there's only one or two donor designated funds. That most all of the designated funds are all Presbytery designated. Is that correct? And I can't articulate which donor ones they are.
That is as I understand it as well. Though we didn't dig down to specifically identify which those were, but we did want to know: are we pretending like we're going to be able to get a greater draw when we have restricted funds, that is donor restricted funds, and we did just not a lot of that in terms of dollar figures. And so all of the designated funds are what the Presbytery has done in its past. And this is a little bit back to the point of this policy is trying to get clarity about what the designations are, and the policy explicitly names what they are. And I want to be clear that part of the designation, when we do a draw, we're setting up a designated fund. We're designating that this goes to the program side. That's a designation. You can't spend that money on the other things, with the exception, which is the 1%, which we've been talking about this evening. But that's still a designation. And then we've already talked about the sale of property as a designation, and we did not change that. We really tried to start with the 1999 resource management policy and build from it, and use new policies that came in. We tried to bring those in wholesale. We really didn't want to start from scratch. We really wanted to try and do it the way the Presbytery has been, recognizing there are some things that could be done clearer for the Presbytery to understand, some of the budget things we've been talking about this evening, as well as this balanced budget and living within the means of the Presbytery so that it is sustainable. And then there were some areas that the Presbytery has not had a clearer policy on, that like conflict of interest or some of those other ones. And we just put all of the best practices for nonprofits in there as well to try and be as thorough as we could.
Right. I appreciate that. I do think some people think there's more donor designated funds we can take from, and they're just not there. It's not a lot of not big dollars in that category. Thank you very much for your good work. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Carson. I want to, for anybody who's watching this in the future, Joel Morgan put in the chat that as of last month, that number is under $4 million. I think that refers to the invested funds.
So, so the 12-quarter average does some market smoothing that we don't really want to be, and Joel's not suggesting this, I know, because I know how he understands this, but the 12-quarter average is trying to smooth out market volatility. Some organizations do a 20-quarter, which makes it even a little flatter, but that 5 years felt like it was not quite as responsive. So that 4 million is that this this quarter, at least right now, is down, but that figure won't be grabbed until the end of Q2, and then we'll get Q3 and so forth. So in July, the subcommittee of investments makes a recommendation on what the draw should be to the trustees, anywhere not lower than 4, not greater than 5. And from that, you're going to have 10 of the 12 quarters. You could use the past 12 quarters, but remember, you're going to get Q3. So let's say that the trustees this summer set it at 4.5%. You've already heard I like 4.5. So they set it at 4.5. We will then can take the past 10 quarters and know about what that draw is going to look like for planning purposes. That draw, though, does not take place until after the end of 25. So in January of 26, you then do the 12 quarters, and then the policy is having that money placed in the Presbytery account in February. Cherry wisely pointed out that if you put in that money in February, if you do the full draw, those monies that you pulled out, the 200,000+, is not now getting a return on it. And the committee talked about what does that look like for us, and do we want to do a quarterly draw so we know what the draw is for 26, but we take a quarter each quarter? We could certainly do that. It felt a little bit complicated to us in trying to explain that, but more to the point for us was a cash flow issue. That we've been using the investment at RBC. They are carrying more than 10% in liquid assets right now because we've been pulling money from it as we've needed. And the better investment is that you're not having liquidity there, except for the way in which the investment firm is using to make new purchases of assets. That RBC, or the investment firm, knows how much you're going to be asking for in what month, gives them a lot better ability to do the investments. And we can't go ask our investment firm to send us more money in 26 if we have run out of cash flow. So we thought it was a prudent way that, yes, Cherry's correct. We could be losing some investment on that $200,000. But we thought for cash flow issues, it outweighed it. I'm not sure which is right, but that's the way the committee thought about it.
Question and statement. Just remembering 2019, just before 2020, when the strategic plan was approved by the Presbytery, and Fred Harbour and the team had put together some presentations, which was recommended. And I was working with Fred on the budget. And so we did a review the night prior to the presentation. And so Fred and I went over the numbers. And the previous year, I believe 2019, S&P Dow, the return was about 19%. And so Fred and I discussed it, and I said, Fred, what was the return 2 years ago, 3 years ago, a little farther back? And I said, the figures we should use should be something that is maybe a little consistent to what the market is doing. And I know you don't chase the market, and I know RBC has a good reputation. This is a good presentation, really is. You put together the numbers, put together, quite a bit of information. But we did that. We went back and we looked at the figures, and I think we asked maybe just some verification of what, and I think we had come up with a figure higher than 4.5, 5, or 6, but we refused to use that number to predict what the cash flow would be if money needed to come out. So here we are today, about 4 years later, and I think the discussion is kind of similar. And I think the figures are very solid and the recommendations are good. But my question would be, some of the assets are not liquid. What are the plans when if the market shifts positively and the SS investment returns come in, and vice versa if less than what you plan comes in? I mean, are there any strategies or plans to address those two possibilities?
That's a great, thank you, Lamar. That's a really important and great question. The hope is that over the long run of a portfolio, that it is going to retain its purchasing power. So inflation, we've got to be, if we take a 5% draw, we're going to need to add inflation on what the investment returns. Because if you don't hedge for inflation, if you simply take what the income was from the investment over the year, the next year's purchasing power will be eroded by inflation. So that's why the 4 to 5% is used typically, and then you add 2.5%, 3% for inflation, and you're dialing up somewhere between 6.5%, 7%. Some endowments think that number should be 7.7%. I think that's probably a little bit high for it's certainly high for RBC. But Jeff's by the way, who has worked with us for a long time, has just been great working with the committee, very clear and helpful. And the RBC, Jeff, at least I shouldn't say RBC, but Jeff was very affirming of this 4 to 5% range. So yes, there will be times where the market is down, and there'll be 2, 3, 4 quarters that it is down, and that comes into the calculation. But then there'll be other times when it's, when the market is giving us, 9, 10% in our portfolio, and it grows, but we're still down in that 4 to 5%. And so over the long run, what we find financially is that the purchasing power of 4.5 million or 4 million, you pick a figure, it could be $1 million, that purchasing power will be the same for the most part in 10 years and in 20 years. Now it's going to be a lot larger dollar figure, but its purchasing power will essentially be retained. And that's the arbitration between future needs and current day needs, that we'd like to be able to be doing the same level of good work today that we can be, and we will be doing in 10 years from now.
Thanks for that question, Lamar. Others that want to jump into the conversation? Barclay, I know you had mentioned you had other thoughts on your mind. This might be a good time to jump into that.
Sure. Thanks for circling back.
Sure.
Some of what I had has been addressed, which is great. I'll second Franklin's request that I think it would be helpful that if a pro forma 2025 budget could be presented, taking into account the proposed policy, what it would look like. It appears it's been created. I think that would be helpful to the group to
Okay.
have an understanding of when it's all said and done, what does this really mean? And what we could expect to see a year from now. I guess what question,
But before you go on,
Yep.
here was, I'll blow it up pretty big. Here is the spreadsheet that we put together. So the congregational support, these are just out of our budget. Congregational support, a little over 600,000. The draw on programs, if we did it at a 3.6% draw, notice it's 3.6 because then we added another percent. So then that's a 4.6 draw, but the draw for programs would be 163,000 and the draw for administration would be 45,000. This gets us to the 814,702 as income. And that's the income that the Presbytery is showing that we hope to receive in 2025. The administrative draw, then these numbers here are, as best as I could interpret the budget and make them into these simpler categories, just because this is a sample. But the denominational support, office administration, property, and payroll puts us at 577,704. Then in the program area, we end up with, these are the same numbers that is in the current budget. Notice again that the anti-racism committee is 0 because that funding is coming from a designated account for 2025, but it isn't shown in the budget. So I still don't know. I just haven't asked. I mean, Cindy or others could have given it to me, but was not our purpose. But we did come up with the 236,000. So you notice that you got a $393 surplus with this draw using the managed fund principal as of December 31st, 2024 of 4.5 million. I didn't ask for the prior quarters. I got them much later from RBC, but this is just the sample that we use just to see how this would work. Now, notice that when you're looking at the draw for programs, the program draw is 163,000. It is not enough to cover this 236,000 in program expenditures. And so you're taking some from the other areas in order to get up to this program expenditure. And that's an important part at which we try and think about with as a Presbytery does its budgeting. Is this?
I think
David,
this would be helpful I think this will be helpful to the population of the POJ.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
But
I
I
do think something. I'm sorry. I would love to just jump in here a little bit. And for any of those watching in the future, I am a little suspicious of some of those numbers. The intents from churches seems pretty high. So
that's what we budgeted. I don't disagree. It might be high.
Okay.
That
I was looking at
is what we
something
put in for our 2025 budget. We did
5.
not make,
Okay.
these are none of our numbers. These are all numbers from the current budget.
Okay, cool. Sorry to have jumped in there.
No, hey, you're the moderator. You can jump in.
I try not to throw that around, but Barclay,
Well,
please
I
continue. I see
defer
a couple of
to
hands.
our prior executive presbyter and the current interim if it relates to the same topic.
Yeah, is this kind of jumping into this topic that we're discussing, Carson?
Yeah.
Please go ahead then.
One thing which was not in the original budget, but as you remember, when we approved the budget, additional 102,000 to Camp Hanover. So that just blows it all apart. And again, as Barclay said, this kind of not proposal, but projection, I think, helps people come to reality. I just don't think we've been in reality world very much recently. And so I found that very helpful. Thank you.
Pro forma is a term that I use, like, let's pretend that we had this policy in place back last fall.
Can I jump in now?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought Barclay was
Okay.
continuing. Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah. I don't have the figures in front of me, David, but if memory serves me well, the $600,000 y'all got from the budget, I had a long discussion with Cindy about the proper way to record things. The $93,000 that went to NWC is drawn from one of the accounts from like page 22. And so in the budget, the way they showed it, you had in the income that 93,100 showed up in the income, which you had about 505,000 our guesstimate for the giving from the congregations, plus that 93 that was coming from a separate account. And then in the body of the budget, you saw where that 93,000 was taken out. So it was a wash. But that's why the income side number you have there looks inflated, because it is inflated. But it was taken back out on the expense side and all. The non-accountant in the conversation wanted us to move all that stuff away. But we were showing the expense, that. But we worked around a $500,000 anticipated income from giving. And then those other two numbers just offset each other from the plus and the minus side.
So I think if we do develop a handout or something, and Joel, I see your hand, maybe Cindy could help us to kind of iron out any wrinkles that there might be and point to sources of income. Sam, I think it's Sam. I see your hand. Joel, do you want to get on this specific line of thought, and then
Yeah,
we can jump to Sam?
I also just wanted to just with this example, which is I mean, I think is helpful, and I do think on some level we ought to have some sort of example like this so people can really see is that, because we are using 2025 salaries, we are, the salary for our temporary general presbyter is not what we would need to pay to a general presbyter were we to hire a full-time general presbyter for in the year 2026, which is what we're what Mission Council has been told we're supposed to be doing. So, and we're developing a job description for that, but we don't know what the funds are yet. Just so we know that, I mean, that if churches get $500,000, we have a part-time stated clerk, a full-time general presbyter, a part-time, I'm not for sure what her hours are, administrative person, Barbara, and we have a communications person on that, and our accountant. And so there's 5 people that have to feed out of $500,000 that we're going to need to figure, that's where I think people will really be like, oh my gosh, they might think that's plenty of money for 5 people. Well, they haven't looked at salaries and they haven't looked at what it costs to support people. So anyway, that's what I just wanted to say about that. So
Thanks, Joel. Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make sure, and David, I'm going to look and see if he reaches to smack me.
No way, Sam. Never.
So what I appreciate the discussion around what if we made 2025 look like it conformed to this policy. That's the sense of what I took from the last 10 or 15 minutes of conversation. Are we agreed to that? Okay. I think that if that's the sense of the group and that's what David is able to do magically, I think the timing of presenting that is very important, because in the business world, that presenting that creates a shock factor. That's gonna reverberate around the room and around the presentation completely, because all of a sudden the reason that SFG was created was not to say right or wrong. The reason the Presbytery created the SFG was to say, how can we be more sustainable into the future? And I think that's what we tried to do in that group. So I'm okay if you want to show a 2025 balanced budget looks like, but I do have some concern that it's gonna cause a whole lot of people to deeply inhale as they realize what the potential ramifications of a balanced budget look like. I can
And-
also tell you, after looking at this for months on end now with SFG, that if there isn't a balanced budget approach, the runway is really short.
It's very short. And so my hesitancy, Josh and the Mission Council.
Oh, did we lose David?
I've spent a
Stand
lot
by,
of time with
folks.
David, but I'm not going to try to finish that sentence.
Yeah, I'm going to watch for him to try and reappear, and maybe we all just take a sharp inhalation at this moment. But hopefully he'll be back. If anybody has his cell phone and can text him and tell him he's not on the screen anymore, that might help.
I'd also love to know, with all the people on the call, if we just took 2 seconds and said our name and what church we're at. That would be really cool for me, because I know many of you, but I don't know all of you on this call.
Yeah, I'm letting David back in.
Well, maybe we can do that at the end, Josh, or something. That would be.
Yeah, I think that would be a great thing to do, possibly.
And that's
David,
really
did
all I
you-
have to
are you
say about
back?
that.
Yeah, right. Well, that clears it up real good, David.
I knew that would be so salient. I'm glad you all got the exact point there. So Josh
yes,
and
go
the
ahead.
MC were very gracious about what the special finance group report would be, and do we want to do slides and all of that. And we talked about it, and and I'm really hesitant. And I said, we won't have any slides. The presentation is the thing, and we want to be able to let the Presbytery be able to have the discussion about it. My concern is I don't want some of the shock to get in the way of what I believe is a good policy as this first step. But I have been hearing that there is a need for more understanding between restricted, I should say, donor restricted net assets, non-donor, non-restricted assets, and designated. So we did put together a flow chart that that the committee is the late this afternoon put together, and that might be a handout because that area seems to be of particular importance. There's a lot of conversation around that, and we have adjusted it because several of the good accountants in the group have said, this is not quite precisely right. And so we've gone back to GAAP. We were doing things that were prior to the December 15th, I think 2017. There was a change in that. And so we're trying to capture the best kind of language from that as we can. And so that's another one of the changes that would take place within the policy that we would present. So I'm still unclear about the about whether a sample budget or even any kind of illustrations, how much they're helpful and how much they're add murkiness.
So I'm going to jump in a little bit, and then Franklin, I'll get to you. I do just want to kind of acknowledge that, I've heard from folks who've watched the recording of our last conversation and taken from that. And in that conversation, there was some math that said if we applied this, we would have about a $4,000 shortfall. And then we've looked at an item that shows a $400 surplus. And so I do think
the difference in
sorry,
those
David.
is 0.1%.
Yes. So, but I've also heard some discussion that this could actually be a much greater deficit if it were applied. So I think that what I would be looking for in any kind of illustration or comparison side by side would be
Oh.
like, what is the real, I mean, what is the real impact of adopting this policy in terms of dollars and cents? It sounds great to me. And then, you know, this idea that there is going to be that sharp intake and that
Okay, so
absorbing it.
let's say that adopting the policy gets us to the fall, and we're looking at a $300,000 deficit. Cherry's right about the deficit, by the way, because of the 10% for property. And so she's right. She's right about that. We tried to capture what we saw in the current operational budget for 2025 in the thing I just showed you. But
Okay.
but that's just trying to see what we could glean. But we're really not trying to do the budgeting. And we're not trying to do cuts.
No.
We're just trying to give us a process that we could then have that conversation in the fall. But if we're looking at a 300,000 and we tell the presbytery we got a 300,000, and the presbytery says, well, I'm sorry, why would we sign up for this policy? Why would we not? Except for Sam's right. It's a very short runway.
Yeah. I think it's, it is going to be.
That's where the committee was.
Yeah, and I think you've rightly identified that adopting a sustainable policy is going to force the presbytery, not the SFG, but the presbytery, to make some decisions about how funds are spent. And I think it is helpful to the presbytery to know that, okay, we're talking about finding a couple $1,000s, tens of thousands, hundreds. Those are different mindsets when looking at this. And I've said a lot, so I know, Franklin, you've had your hand up, and I want to let you get in there.
Okay, thank you. Yes, putting into context my concern about, give us a ballpark figure. How close would we be to a balanced budget? I personally don't need to know the details of what parts of the budget would be funded or not funded if the more fine-grained details of how we're allocating the investments to, mission as opposed to operations. But I'm remembering back when the strategic plan was being presented to us for approval a few years ago, it turns out that the financial picture that we were given at the time turned out to be rosy. And it came to a very bad result a few years down the road. I mean, that was traumatic, really, for the presbytery to have to cut positions, partly because they were set up on the assumption that there would be more money to fund those positions than it turns out that there was. So I think I'm looking to this special committee, and I think this special group was set up partly because we're hoping that they would help us out of some wishful thinking that we realized we acted on the basis of a few years ago. And I understand the risk that people will say, well, screw this policy. If approving this means we have this budget of, the budget deficit of 300K or something, we don't need that. And I can see David, and all the work you did with your people there, it would be a shame to have the presbytery vote it down. But gosh, we have wishful thinking.
The committee would feel like we did really good work, regardless of the vote. I don't know that this is not a personal for us. This is our best offering, and if the presbytery, what the presbytery can use of it, fantastic. We do think that that giving the presbytery the clearest kind of information is the best way for them to do discernment and to make a good decision. And we think this policy helps do that better than maybe we have been.
Sam, do you want to come back in?
Sorry, I think I'm going to echo what David just said. I think that it's important to realize that we experienced the creation of the 2025 budget, and out of that, the SFG was born. So and our goal was not to make a budget for the presbytery. It was absolutely not that. We were trying to lay the foundation and then the path for the presbytery to follow to be sustainable for farther into the future, and to, at the same time, create some guardrails, if you will, for what the presbytery has today and how to make that last longer.
Thanks so much, Sam. I see we've got about 7 minutes left. This was scheduled from 6:30 to 8. I don't mind going a little bit beyond.
I'm glad
Barclay,
to stay as long as people need.
okay. I'm sorry, Barclay, I see your hand, and Carrie, what do you want to jump in here? And I'm sorry. So let me go with Carrie first, and then we can return to Barclay.
I think what we need to, for those who are here in this room and then in the other room when we meet, is to focus in on the work that David and that group did. The process and what they're presenting us is an honest appraisal of investment policy. They weren't charged with, as Sam had said, with coming up with the budget. And maybe being careful during the meeting, Josh, that we don't start chasing actual budget things, because that's not what this report is about. You know, this is the assets that we do have, the things that we've been blessed with and have called to be good stewards of. This is a stewardship program. This is how we can best use our assets. And, you know, to try and rein in the conversations about that, as opposed to all the actual budget decisions will come up in October. So everyone's going to get a chance to chime in on how much we should or should not spend for different things. But I think we need to try and maintain focus on what this report really is doing. It's laying down a financial pathway and standardizing how we go about from year to year to year, to do away with the wild swings that seems to have been happening at the James over the last 5, 8, 10 years. You know, the different perceptions people had of our sustainability. I think this policy is aiming towards us to where we have that realistic tool to measure where we are. So I just hope that we can try and keep on track with the policy dead in front of us, and that's all.
Thanks, Carrie. Barclay?
I'll add this comment to this current topic. Maybe instead of presenting a pro forma budget, is to compare what the approved budget is drawing from the investments to make the budget balance. Per page 20 of the June Presbytery meeting packet, that number 274,000 rounded. How does that compare to what the draw would be under this policy? If we had the policy in place and we use the policy to come up with the draw, how does the 274 compare? Is it more than, is it less than? I'm thinking it's probably a little bit more than. To me, that's the delta in what this policy, the impact this policy has on our ability to feel comfortable that we're actually living within our means.
Barclay, that's very helpful. I think that really captures easily understood, and it's about 50,000. If you did a 5% draw, you're about 225.
I just came up with 50,000 myself, so I don't know what your day job is, but you sound like, and you definitely come across as a good accountant. So if it's not accountancy, you missed your calling.
That's the nicest compliment I have gotten for a long time. And I'm a pastor in the presbytery, and I'm going to tell my accountants in my congregation, I got complimented as being an accountant.
Well, you definitely have an administrative financial acumen, and so I do agree. I think we're looking at about 50,000, which I don't find shocking, versus 500,000. So I haven't given up that the POJ can continue well into the future. And to stop the bleeding.
The special finance group is very hopeful about the POJ. We have some difficult discernment and decisions and challenges before us, but we all are hopeful, and we think that this helps us get at the ministry things that God's calling us to do.
I agree. The one other item I had in my inventory to either comment on or to ask, the charge to this group included looking at revenue enhancements and cost controls. I don't see anything addressing those two areas. Am I right that I haven't missed anything in those areas?
Yeah. We appreciated that there was the and or at the end of that list of things. We took the or side of that part because as we tried to think about what might be some revenue enhancements or cost reductions, it really put us in places that we felt ill-equipped to be the ones to be trying to weigh in on those things. And as we talked further, we really got clarity that the best way that we can help the presbytery with revenue enhancements and cost reductions is to give it an apparatus at which it can go after those kind of conversations. But there is not weighing in on those kind of budgetary things, and so we were for that. If there was that expectation, we will not meet that expectation.
Fair enough. I appreciate it. I've got a few other items that I'll just send to you by email.
Oh, Barclay, I would any and all, please send them on. We would appreciate it very much.
I have to confess that I got things wrong. This is scheduled to go till 8:30, so we are going to press on. And I see Sam's hand raised.
Yep.
Please go ahead.
Me again. So the other thing I would say, and I don't think David's going to slap me for this one either.
Slap you ever.
When the presbytery arrives at the 2026 budgeting cycle, I don't think there would be any pushback. I know I'll speak for myself. I would certainly be available to sit during that process to serve, if you can imagine, in a parliamentarian type role to help interpret what we meant by the policy as we developed it.
And one caveat about that, I think everybody on the special finance group would be glad to be advisory about that. The official interpretations by the policy are left with the Board of Trustees as their official, that if there is something to be arbitrated, they are the actual ones within the policy. And having said that, also in that same or near that same section is we don't think this policy is any way perfect, and we mandate an every 3-year review process of it. But we imagine that there's going to probably after the first year we're going to say, oh, we need to adjust that. Oh, that did not do what we intended it to do, and so we expect that there's going to need to be work with this as we live into the policy.
And it is truly created as a living document.
Yeah.
One that must be nurtured and maintained. And I agree with David that the trustees have the final final decision point. My point was more that what was the intent of the SFG when we put this together?
So since we've got this more time here, I do have a question, and it's less about the financial side of things and more about the timeline. And as I read the policy, this would require the budget to be voted on at the October or the fall Presbytery meeting, which currently takes place in October. Last year, and for the past several years, we've had a called November meeting to focus purely on the budget. And last year's meeting lasted about 2 hours. So I have my kind of moderator hat on. The October meeting lasted about 4.5 hours. And then the 2 hours for the budget meeting makes for a very long day. So I wondered about that recommendation of adopting it at the fall Presbytery meeting and what's behind that.
So we, as I had said earlier, we did not want to, we tried to stay away from governance issues. And for me, how often the Presbytery meet is a governance issue. We only have a stated fall meeting, and what we were clear about is that we strongly feel you need to approve the budget for the next year before the next year begins. That we shouldn't be having the final approval in February or afterwards. So, so our only choice with the current structure of the Presbytery was October. Now, I don't know how else.
I wonder.
You couldn't write in the policy and say we're always going to approve it at a second meeting in the fall, because then that means that that's our new process.
Well, I wonder if you and the group would consider language similar to what you just said, that this policy shall be the budget shall be approved prior to the calendar year it occurs in, or something along those lines, because that actually frees up the governance piece to allow the Mission Council to determine, well, actually, we don't have much scheduled for October this year, so yeah, we're going to do the budget then. Or I think
Josh, that's a very helpful suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah. We can I impose upon you to put it in an email to me?
I will. Yeah, I will do that for sure.
And then we'll draft language, and I'll talk to the special finance group, which I assume on this one they would be, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then we'll just redline that within the amended policy. I think that's a very helpful, because we're wanting the policy to be very malleable in the places like that, and then a little more, well, I'll use Sam's term, guardrail-ish in some other areas, like the draw percentage.
Yeah. Arson, I see your hand. Go for it. Oh, but you've got to unmute first.
Sorry about that. Real quick, David, I may have misheard what you said before. When will Budget Committee know how much money is coming out of the draw for 26, for example? You said something.
So the trustees would approve what the draw percentage is.
What month?
In July.
Okay.
They have to give it to the trustees by in July, so then they get 2 quarters of the current year. But they're going to take, I would presume they'd take the last 10 quarters. They could take the last 12 quarters, but what they're trying to do is give a really good approximation, but the actual calculation will need 2 more quarters for the remainder of 25. So the actual calculation takes place in January of 26 to be dispersed in February. That's what the current policy listed as.
Just thinking in terms of budget planning, we won't know what that figure is till January.
No, right? You're good. Yes, we will not have the actual dollar figure until January, but for planning purposes, you're gonna be be reasonably close because the 10 quarters and the 12 quarters are not going to be unless something really dramatic has happened in the fall.
I was just thinking that why not make July the figure so that when we're planning budgets, we have a definite amount, and go back 12 quarters prior to July. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, no, we did talk about it, and I it's probably me trying to be clean about what 12 quarters means in terms of 3 years. Send me a note, and the SFG will take it up. Now, if you all send us stuff, we're going to respond. We're going to try and respond to every question or observation you have, and we're going to do that directly back to you. Some of them will then make it into the revised policy. If your suggestion, though, doesn't make it into the revised policy, that just means that the FSG that's not their perspective, but it can still absolutely come up on the floor of Presbytery to amend the policy. And our feelings would not be hurt by that. Josh's afternoon might get booked long, but
Hey, I'm just trying to keep things moving. Barclay, go ahead.
My read of the investment management section 5C3 supports really what Carson's saying, is that the number is provided by the end of July. I don't see a January timeframe in C3. Maybe it's somewhere else in the document.
yeah.
But that makes sense to me, that the people know in July what number we had to work with and not wait until January.
That's fine.
That's a suggestion
Yeah.
that I'm hearing from tonight.
Yeah, and of course, budgets are a planning document. We guess what the congregations are going to give. We don't have an exact figure there, but for us people who like math, we'd like to know exact what it is. It's going to come up, Barclay, in the budgeting section about when the draw takes place. See if I can find that for you fast enough.
Fair enough.
It's going to show up in, well, it says, no, it's in 5C3.
Yep.
The draw shall be calculated each February using the 12-quarter average of the portfolio's market value, and corresponding dollar amount shall be withdrawn from the fund at that time.
Okay.
But there's nothing magical about doing it in January as compared to July.
I just think it's a little awkward.
Yeah.
That you have one number in July and a different one in January.
So
Anyway,
for the math people, you probably want to recognize that the draw, if the Presbytery approves this, the draw for 26 is going to be a little larger than we would maybe expect. Why? Because we're going to be using the last 12 quarters, and the portfolio was larger because we had not been spending it down like we have been. So it is a little, not much, but it's a little inflated. So there'll be a little more draw. Now, the trustees can adjust on that pretty easily by maybe doing a 4% draw. The committee had lots of conversation about that, but we wanted to keep it as simple as possible.
Other points of conversation.
Can you give me the ability to share again?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
No, it's not you. It was me. When I
Let me
first
figure out
logged
how to do
myself
that.
out, I lost the ability to share.
Here you go. And I actually need to step away for just a second, so
Okay. I'm going to
behave
share. I'm going to
yourselves.
share the diagram that we talked about earlier, Josh. So if we did have a handout, this is the handout that the committee is talking about. it's trying to help the presbytery understand the fund classifications: restricted, designated, and undesignated revenues. So presbytery has revenues coming in. They only come in two ways. The only question is it a donor restricted income revenue or not? As Carson was pointing out earlier, we have very few yes on this, but if we have revenue come in, a congregation says we want to be giving this money to go to campus ministry. Well, that is a donor restricted, and so then the net asset is donor restricted, and it must follow the donor's intent. The policy talks about a 3-year default. We'd like to have the presbytery be using its restricted funds within 3 years, whether the restriction is by time or by purpose. But then at that 3-year marker, if it has not been used by that time, we would like to encourage that there's a conversation with the donor to maybe change the restriction so it can get used. But the vast majority, the answer is no, it's not donor restricted. So they are net assets without donor restriction is the GAAP terminology for that. So then the question is this designated by the POJ, this incoming revenue? If it is not, like congregational giving, then it is simply undesignated net assets, and it's available for the annual budgeting. Congregational giving is the example of that. If it is designated, then it's called board designated, and it's set aside for the specific purpose, like reparation action is one that we currently have, and that the policy proposed policy retains exactly as it was approved by the presbytery. So our hope is that this flow chart will help get clarity about the difference of fund classification. If we did a handout, this one's likely. So I'd love your all's feedback about it, whether you think that this is a helpful one.
Sam, I do see you've raised your hand, but I also do want to make sure we get the feedback that David has asked for.
Yep, I'm fine. I can sit here and color.
I see Barclay's hand.
Sorry, Barclay, it's hard when there's a screen share, and so please go ahead. But it's helpful when if you ever find that raise hand feature, that helps a lot.
With dealing with not-for-profits throughout my career, I don't think the POJ level meeting is a good place for this. I think you would lose. I think it'd be more detrimental than helpful. This is more at a finance committee, a board of trustees or whatever level. But
I think I see Tom Coy's hand raised.
Yeah. Maybe to tag on what Barclay just said, if this document is to be helpful, it seems like it needs a little bit of like a few more illustrations to flesh it out, because when you get over to that donor restricted, yes, net assets, a nice definition, but the fact is we have so little invested in that. There are only a couple of funds involved. I think that somehow needs to be noted. This is a minor piece of our financial picture. I mean, majorly speaking, policy-wise, yes, but in terms of our practicality, the illustration has to say, don't look here for some sort of bonanza. It's not there.
No, it's not.
Go to the left side of the picture. That's where the action is.
Yeah.
Carson, do you want to speak to this?
I would just, David, you said something a few minutes ago, donor designated. So what if a congregation designates money for campus ministry you're saying that's donor designated.
Yeah, the donor does not have to be an individual. A
Okay.
group, but foundations do this all the time. They say, here's what you can use this foundation grant for. I mean,
Right.
so communities can do it. But typically we think about it though as individuals, particularly in congregational settings, you know,
Right,
they
right.
gave money for the organ, and so you can only spend it on the organ.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking individuals. That's the reason I said only a couple funds, but as congregations make their pledge for the next year, if there's something could be said about donor restricted individual or congregation, that might be a helpful understanding of donor, because that could impact the
So now I
budget.
really don't want to put it up, because the last thing I'd want to do is to encourage congregations to be restricting their funds. That's the last
Agree.
thing the presbytery wants. We
Agree.
want undesignated funds so that we can make the decisions for the ministry that we're called to do.
I agree completely. It's just that I'm seeing more and more congregations are designating funds
Yeah.
because of whatever issue in their congregation.
Right. We don't want to give to this, but we'll give to that.
Pam, do you feel ready to jump in?
Yeah, I'm going to go back. First I want to say for David that there was great discussion about, do we have a handout? And so this is sort of the medium that we thought would be useful, but hearing the comments, and David's closing comment, that I'm not scared, but I'm going to sort of, putting this as a handout, I would sort of extend it with my eyes closed and it just out on the tip of my fingers. But I wanted to go back to the 12-quarter rolling forecast. And one of the things that the first year is going to be a slanted picture, as David mentioned, but one of the advantages we have, and it's a very imperfect science, is that we can ask the firm managing the investment portfolio what the projection is for that year. What's the projection for the next 3 quarters of the remaining year, so that you have some sense. You're not obligated by that, and it certainly may not come true. We can see the markets have changed dramatically over the last 2 to 3 calendar quarters. So, but it is a tool that the trustees will be able to use when they look, create sort of a forward-looking approach to what does the rest of the year hold in the investment dollars.
Thanks for that. Other thoughts? We've really gotten into it this evening. I'm appreciative of that.
Mm-hmm.
There was no bloodshed.
Not on camera, anyway. Well, I do appreciate the suggestion earlier, and we should have probably maybe done this at the outset, that we introduce ourselves. I would like to maybe call on folks and have them share their name, the church or entity they're connected with, and just share that so we can know who we've been in this space with these past almost 2 hours. So I would say I'm going to call on Tom, and then Sam, and David. You've introduced yourself, so Tom and then Sam.
Tom Coy, I'm teaching elder, retired in 2016, but went back into the parish at Milden Church 5.5 years ago in Sharps, and I'm still there. And also for the last 1.5 years, I've been a co-interim pastor with Judy Thompson at the Campbell Church. That is soon to end. We have a new pastor coming on board on July 1st.
Great.
Sam Curtin. I am a ruling elder at Kirkle Cliff, which is a little church that used to be where Lake Anna is today, that was moved by the congregation to a donated property in Mineral, Virginia.
How about David Thoman and then Sandra Libhart?
I'm Dave Philman, ruling elder from Summit Presbyterian Church, also a member of the Mission Council, and so I guess I'm part of the Board of Trustees.
Thank you. Sandra?
Mute me.
There you
There
go.
we go. Sandy Libhart. I'm a teaching elder pastor at Southdale Presbyterian Church.
Great. Let's have Franklin, then Barkley, then George introduce yourselves.
Franklin Redding, teaching elder, retired. Not too long ago, I was on the presbytery staff.
Barclay Branch, Three Chop, Richmond, ruling elder.
Thank you.
And I'm George Williams, Chester Presbyterian Church. I'm in the finance committee, run the finance committee. And I'll also be at the 10 June meeting to hopefully give a positive vote on this thing, because I think you did a great job in getting a nice procedure set up, and everybody knows you just can't have rampant spending. You just gotta have it set up within constraints, and I think you did a good job.
Thank you. Let's have Lamar and then Carrie and then Carson.
Lamar Lockhart, ruling elder at Chester Presbyterian Church, currently serving on the Personnel Committee and moderate the Self-Development of People Committee. And wonderful presentation, brings back some memories. Hopefully some good memories. Thank you very much.
I'm Kerry Foster. I'm a teaching elder. I'm also the temporary general presbyter. And myself and Cherry are two carryovers from the folks who sat on last year's budget committee that brought forth the budget for 2025. So you don't need to thank us, but we did the best we could.
Carson Ryan, teaching elder, interim pastor at the Summit Church in North Stafford.
Let's have Joel and JR and then Cherry.
Joel Morgan, teaching elder, currently member at large, but I'm pastor-elect at Campbell Memorial Presbyterian in Williams, Virginia. I'm also the Mission Council moderator and vice president of the trustees. And so I get to help enact. As soon as this gets passed, I will be contacting folks so that we can get this budget process, this rock rolling downhill, hopefully. So.
J.R. Marker, ruling elder, Fairfield Presbyterian.
Cherry Peters, ruling elder, Second Presbyterian, Richmond, immediate past moderator of the Presbyterian. General.
And then Charles and then Jean after him. If you're able to unmute and introduce yourselves.
Charles Grant, teaching elder, Old Goat.
Thanks.
Gene Rosen, ruling elder, Fairfield.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I'm Josh Andrzejewski, teaching elder at First Pres Richmond. I'm associate there and also serving currently as the moderator of the presbytery. And David, I skipped over you. You kind of introduced yourself earlier, but that might be good to review.
I'm one of the pastors, teaching elder, one of the pastors at First Presbyterian in Charlottesville. And we're also on July 1st are going to welcome our new installed associate pastor, Rachel Thompson Orfield, and we can't wait. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Just some housekeeping things, and then I am going to ask, let's see, Joel, would you close us in prayer after I say a few things? So anybody on the Zoom now or folks who are watching this in the future, I hope the future is good. Let us know how the future is going. We are interested, I hope you can see the receptivity of the SFG to receive feedback. And we will do our best to get that updated version of the report and recommendations out. If you are planning to bring a motion, an amendment, as the announcement of the meeting said, it is so helpful and it gives your motion the best chance if we can receive that in advance, because that way we can make sure we have it up on the screen. We can best present that to people. Motions can be made at any point during the meeting, so that it's not a restriction, it's more of a courtesy that we're requesting. And I wanted to kind of make sure we note that here. I think that is all that I would want to say in closing. So Joel, would you close us with a word of prayer?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. Let's pray. Lord our God, creator of all resources, we give you thanks for the work of this special finance group, for the inquisitive minds and the questions that have been asked tonight, for the good dialogue and discussion we've had. We give you thanks. We pray, Lord God, that you would bless our friends in Christ that are part of our presbytery and all the churches around our presbytery with strong faith, with a really wonderful movement of the Holy Spirit as we seek to continue to rebuild trust amongst ourselves and to move forward in faith, to continue to help the presbytery serve the churches and do the work that you have called us to do. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Best to you all, and good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.